Okay, let's try and be positive for a little while. Let's first focus on husbands and wives. Probably to husbands and wives in your marriage service, maybe someone read out Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18. The Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." Well, here's your opportunity to put this, help each other, support each other, whether it's learning the language, whether it's in the home. Equal opportunities. So if in your culture the wife does all the cooking and the cleaning and the shopping and the washing, maybe I should revise these. If in your culture the husband does all the cooking and the cleaning and the washing and the shopping, share the tasks. My wife and I, we weren't able to have children, and she wanted to have an equal opportunity to get the language. And so we decided during language school, she would wash the clothes and I would wash the floors. She would cook the meal and I would wash the dishes. And we kept this arrangement up for the 2 years while we were learning Chinese full time. And when that 2-year period came to an end, I said to her, "Dear, can we go back now to the original arrangement when you did everything?" But she'd enjoyed those 2 years so much that we've kept the same arrangement for the last 35 years. So avoid competition, avoid comparing. Be encouragers, not competitors. And don't say, "Dear, how many marks did you get in that exam?" 94? I got 95. That's not going to help the marriage, okay? Be encouragers, not competitors. And to everyone, we need to recognize our strengths and our weaknesses, and we'll be looking at that in the 2 lectures, one learning styles and the other personality and language learning. Find out how you learn best, but be open to being told what you're doing is not effective. My job, helping people basically learn Chinese in Taiwan and in mainland China, I've been doing it for the last 30 years. What I find is I sort of have to sift people's ideas. Some have good ideas, others not so good ideas. Those who have good ideas, I say, "Tim, that's a great idea. Keep doing that." Someone else, "Bill, I suggest you stop doing that idea right now. It's not really very helpful." I remember a couple who came to Taiwan and they were going to start up a children's organization. They weren't with OMF, and that didn't matter, but they were going to start up a children's organization. And the husband, I think he was probably someone who's rather shy and inhibited. He therefore didn't like going outside. People would laugh at him or wouldn't understand what he was saying. Very embarrassing, he felt. And so he said to himself, "We're going to start up this Taiwanese children's organization, and so I'll need to be able to read and write all these Chinese characters." And so each evening, he would sit at his study desk for hours, practicing writing all these characters, while his wife was outside chatting with the neighbors. And I'm sure each evening, when he put his head on the pillow to go off to sleep, he would say, "Well done, good and faithful language learner. You have yet again worked hard at the language." And I'm sure he slept very soundly. But sad to say, 2 years later, when they did start this organization, and hired Taiwanese staff, he could hardly say anything. And so the staff would talk to his wife. They wouldn't talk to him because they couldn't really communicate, and they would say to his wife, "Will you please tell your husband, blah, 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 blah." And he should have been told right at the beginning of learning Chinese, you might think what you're doing is right, but you should have stopped it right away and found ways to practice communicating. Let's just go back to thinking about some key attitudes, and particularly that I believe God brought me and has brought you thousands of miles probably to the mission field to teach you new lessons about trusting Him and loving Him, serving Him, and particularly lessons in the area of a humble and teachable spirit. Sometimes I think about Moses. Remember Moses, you can divide his life into 3 lots of 40 years. His first 40 years must have been tremendous fun, growing up in the palace there. Then he tried to save his fellow Israelites, and God, he had to flee, and God wanted him to look after sheep for the next 40 years. Why? To teach him mainly just one lesson, the lesson of humility. It's not me, but it's God. And I thought, interesting. God felt Moses needed 40 long years to learn that lesson. The problem is, you have only got 2 years. You've only got 2 years. And so we need that attitude of, God, you have brought me here, not just to learn the language, but you've brought me here to learn how to trust you more, to love you more, to serve you more as I serve these people. And I believe that if during language learning period you cannot be a demonstration, a testimony of a humble and teachable person, if you can't display those qualities during language school, I doubt if you will ever be successful as a missionary later on. Okay, let's move on to something else. The importance of maintaining a balanced lifestyle during language learning. The importance of maintaining a balanced lifestyle during language learning. I don't know if any of you have read the book written by Eugene Peterson. Actually, it came out a long while ago. It came out in 1980. A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. Now, Eugene Peterson was writing about discipleship, but he could have been writing about language learning. Because language learning demands the total person, totally involved, totally committed over a long period of time. And if you don't do that, you won't get the language. To be honest, I am not a gifted language learner. But I thank God that I was determined and that I am disciplined and I was committed to getting Chinese. And I gave it all I've got. And that's what you've got to do. Give it all you've got. And yet at the same time, live a balanced lifestyle, avoiding burnout. Firstly, physical. Learning a language is a very stressful thing. You're at home preparing for class, and you go off to school, 2, maybe 3 hours in class each day. It's very stressful. And therefore, you need to do something to release the stress. And maybe you're not a very sporty sort of person before, but it's important that you do some physical exercise. Maybe it's swimming. Maybe it's jogging. Maybe it's cycling. But aerobics is good. But do some physical exercise to release the tension. I remember in Taiwan once we had a whole group of language learners who all had back problems. The back club, we called them. They all had back problems. It's a very tense thing, learning language. Not only the physical area, but also the emotional area. It's important that you know yourself and know how much you can take. I like to use this illustration of traffic lights. When the green light's flashing, that's fine. But when the yellow light begins to flash, you need to take notice. The problem with burnout people, and I've been down that road myself, is that when the yellow light starts flashing, workaholics ignore it and just keep going. And then the red light starts flashing and they still carry on. And then they burn out and they're of no use to anyone again. And so what you need to do is to be able to take your emotional temperature, to recognize when the yellow light starts flashing and take action. Maybe you need a break. Maybe you need to get away for a day and that's all you need. But do something to avoid burnout. I think what's key is that learning a language is a lifelong task. Learning a language is a lifelong task. The Chinese have it right. 活到老，学到老. Live until old, study until old. And so if you find that there's something upsetting you emotionally, something hurting you, try and pinpoint what it is and do something about it. Maybe it's a teacher at school who you find very frustrating, her teaching style, or she's humiliating you all the time. Well, don't just sit there. Try and do something to change the teacher. Particularly where it's one-on-one teaching situations, just you and the teacher. Go to the head of the school. Schools like OMF in Japan or in Thailand, you can go and see the OMF person. In Taiwan, we use a private school, but it's still one-on-one. And the OMF coach can go and negotiate with the school. I believe it's very important that you look forward going to school each day because you can't wait to be with that teacher. And yet, if it's going to be another day with that teacher you can't stand, that's going to be emotionally very stressful. Do something to change it. Or maybe if it's a classroom situation, there's others in the class, maybe there's someone there who's annoying you, some other student. I remember once I went to a city in China and I was talking with some language learners who all happened to be in the same class, and they were saying, well, there's someone in our class who keeps asking questions and is using up too much of the class time just with their questions, and it's upsetting us. And I said to them, I said, you're all in China for the same purpose. Why don't you sit down together and talk it through as a group with that person there and come to an arrangement that you can all accept? So if there's something upsetting you, don't just sit there. Do something about it. Do something about it. Take your emotional temperature regularly. Thirdly, it's going to go on to the next one. Just hang on 2 seconds, it'll get there soon. Sorry, better cut that, sorry. I don't know why, it's just stuck there. Yeah. It's stuck. Just hang on 2 seconds.
Yeah, it's fine.
Sorry about that. Okay, I'll jump past that slide. Did I just, is there a place you can...
So you're going to skip past that slide?
Yeah, did I have it up before about live until old, study until old? Was it? It was showing there. Yeah. So I can now go on to the next section, which is maintain spiritual health.
Yeah, you can just go. It's still recording.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. I see. Okay. The third area is maintaining spiritual health, not just physical health, not just emotional health, but spiritual health. What I find is that many language learners go dry spiritually during the long period of language learning, where every day is the same. Get up in the morning, prepare for class, go to class, come home, and get over it and go to bed, and then the next day is more of the same. And it's important that you do something to maintain spiritual freshness, something just more than the daily quiet time. Maybe go away for half a day once a month. We know about culture shock, but it had to be a Korean who wrote about spiritual shock. And in an OMF magazine a long while ago, Brother Son wrote this. He said, "I found it difficult to maintain a normal spiritual life because of the intensive language course at Lopburi in Thailand. Often I would ask myself, as a missionary who came to share the gospel, what am I doing when I cannot even maintain my own spiritual life?" It was a time of spiritual hunger and thirst. And he went on to say, especially for me, the spiritual shock was greater than the culture shock. And so do something. Jin Sik, who came from Korea during language school, he decided to translate a book on prayer, translate it from English into Korean. That was a great idea. But do something. Do something more than just your daily quiet time. Going back to Luis da Silva from Brazil. Luis, before he came to Taiwan, he was the pastor, the senior pastor of a 2,000 member church in Brazil. And he told me every day he was preaching. Every day he was helping people. People would come to him and say, "Pastor da Silva, I need your advice. Pastor da Silva, I need your help." And he told me he then left there, joined OMF, came to Taiwan, and struggled learning Chinese. And he said no one came to him and said, "Pastor da Silva, I need your help. Pastor da Silva, please preach a sermon." But he said the problem was he'd been so used to creating sermons on a daily basis in Brazil that in Taiwan, when he put his head on the pillow before he went off to sleep, he would create yet another sermon. But the problem was, when he got this sermon ready to deliver, the only member of the congregation present, his wife, was already sound asleep. And he came to my home one day, and I remember he said to me, "Martin, I now realize God has brought me to Taiwan to die to my former glory as a pastor." And at that time, Luis was at rock bottom, but he was ready to climb. And today, God is using Luis in China in a wonderful way. Attitude is key. But just in the last few minutes, I want to mention a second word that's important. Expectations. Expectations. How long do you think it's going to take for you to learn your target language? Most of us have unrealistic expectations. I remember our first prayer card. This wasn't the first one, but I always remember our first prayer card. It had on it 1976, learn Chinese, 1977, begin ministry. So simple, so unrealistic. So simple, so unrealistic. I remember a Canadian, he wasn't with OMF, but he knew I was helping people learn Chinese, and he came to me one day, The problem was that before coming, he'd read several books about CIM missionaries in China who were preaching after 6 months, you see, and it got him all fired up. But he wanted to be a bit more reasonable. So he said, Martin, I want to be preaching after 9 months. Do you think that's reasonable? I said, Bill, knowing you, I think it is, but I feel sorry for the congregation. Let's be realistic. Let's be realistic. And I want to say to all Koreans, many Chinese, some Americans, and to all who have read The Purpose-Driven Life, please ask your language coach how long they think it's going to take you to learn the language. Don't ask them as soon as you get off the plane. Give them, say, 3 months or maybe 6 months so they'll be able to measure your progress, see how you're getting on. And they say to them, tell me honestly, how long do you think it's going to take? Ask them, then believe them, and thirdly, then tell the supporters at home so they don't write these silly letters asking about how's your ministry going when you've only been there 6 months. Okay? And in that way, adjust your expectations to something that's realistic. 2 key words: attitude, expectation.